record on this computer. Today we have Adam and Shelby from the Montana Nonprofit Association here to talk with us for Nonprofit Cafe, and we're very grateful. We'll let them kind of dive into what they'll be speaking on in just a minute, but just wanted to thank you all for being here. This is our final Nonprofit Cafe session until August. So we're grateful that you chose to start your Friday morning with us. My name is Maggie. I'm the Program and Events Manager at the Community Foundation. Bridget's over in the corner of your screen as well, the Executive Director at the Community Foundation. So our mission is to connect people who care to causes that matter to build a better community. And part of our way of doing that is by supporting you all in the nonprofit sector. So we are grateful each month to be able to do that through Nonprofit Cafe. Oop, just need to admit a few more folks. Yeah, and we're grateful that you're all here. We will turn it over to Adam and Shelby, who are going to be sharing some awesome resources with you all that they've been working on at the Montana Nonprofit Association in this session called Navigating Your New Normal.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you. Let me get my screen shared here so you can see our slideshow.
And while Adam's doing that, if you guys just want to chat in, I know there's quite a few of you, but if you just want to chat in your organization that you're working with so we can kind of see who's on the call today.
And Maggie, I think if it's possible, could you make me a host so I'm able to share?
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Seeing a lot of familiar names and also organizations. So thanks for joining us this Friday morning as Adam's getting that pulled up. We'll kind of do a little intro. Because I'm seeing a lot of familiar names and faces, you've probably all heard some version of our welcome and introduction before. But my name is Shelby. I'm the Professional and Organizational Development Director with the Montana Nonprofit Association. And we believe that nonprofits in Montana are essential in so many ways for our communities, our families, our economy, our local governments, and our environment, our children, and right now our lives and our health. And because of that belief, we provide support to nonprofits across the state through advocacy and public policy on the state and national levels, through training and education, and through member products and services. So we provide whatever support we can to make the job part of your job easier so you can focus on fulfilling and furthering your mission. Recently, we've shifted a lot of our efforts towards pandemic response and resources to help all of you deal with the overwhelming amount of uncertainty that we're all faced with, both as leaders of nonprofits and as organizations. And as individuals as well. I think that's all wrapped up. So today we're really excited, and I'll introduce Adam here. Adam, if you want to say hi and introduce yourself before we get going.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Adam Jesperson. I'm the Director of Nonprofit Innovation with M&A. And I think Shelby and I primarily have taken the lead on what's M&A's COVID response, especially as far as helping organizations plan for and think about their future in the immediate term and moving forward in the long term. And so the resources we're sharing today were actually resources that we shared with through M&A town halls over the past few weeks, of which we've done a number. I think in the last 2 months, we've done at least 25, if not more, maybe over 30 town hall conversations on different topics. And these were a couple that we have compilated into one presentation for you here today. But I did mention that just as if you have not been to our website and not seen our town halls and are looking for resources and information, that might be a good source for you because we're going to continue those conversations into the future. So feel free to visit mtnonprofit.org if you're looking for more information.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Adam, for that.
Yeah.
And thank you all for the awesome intros. It's good to see your faces and see your organizations there. So as Adam was mentioning, you know, the tools we're going to walk through today are really geared to help you navigate immediate needs and future needs. Just kind of a big intro. Our goal today is to gauge a little bit of where you are and help start some conversations. We're all cycling through a lot of different places as individuals, yes, but also as organizations. So we kind of want to help you gauge that and start some conversations. We want to provide just an overview of the 3 tools we've developed, which I'll send links to as we walk through them, so you can kind of pull them up on your screen if you want, or have access to them afterwards. And then finally, we want to answer questions that you have. So if you have any questions, please feel free at any time either to chat them in or to raise your hand, or whatever the culture is on these webinars to chime in. We will have time for questions after each section as we cover the toolkits, but in case you need a clarification, please feel free to chime in. All right, let's dive in.
So just a bit about today's agenda. We're going to highlight a bit about the approach that Shelby and I and that we at M&A have taken to developing these tools, who they're intended for, what their purpose is, provide some overview of what the tools are, and some examples of how to use them, and then dive into actually looking at one of the templates that we provided, because it has some technical aspect to it. So we wanted to actually spend some time looking at how to use the financial scenario modeling workbook, just so you all feel comfortable diving in and using that for your own organization in your own context. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll move on to the next slide. Let Shelby take it from there.
Thanks, Adam. So the 3 tools that we've got, we have our cash flow projection template, and just a kind of a rough overview. It's really looking at your immediate needs. And in terms of who that tool is going to be the most useful for, I don't want to say anything prescriptively. Obviously, anyone can use these tools, but EDs, COOs, finance directors, your treasurer on your board, whoever is dealing most directly with your finances. We'll be talking through the new Normal Toolkit, and really that's aimed at helping you frame a response strategy or role to COVID-19 and the pandemic now and moving forward. And it's really recommended that teams approach this as a group. And so whether that's your entire staff, if you're at a smaller organization, or a leadership team, or a couple different teams, it's a great thing to be led by an ED, but really engaging the entire team in that process in some way. And then finally, we'll be talking about the scenario modeling workbook. And it's when you're ready to kind of drill into that financial strategy and map a clearer picture. So cash flow is what's on hand and what are we dealing with right now. New normal is what's our approach going to be and what's our role, and a little bit of strategic thinking. And then scenario modeling will be that financial strategy and ready to drill into possible scenarios and future and what that allows us to do right now. I'll say a couple things. One is this process is not linear. If you're like me, you love spreadsheets and you're like, okay, I'm gonna check my cash flow projection template, and then I'm gonna move on to the new normal, and then I'm gonna be ready for scenario modeling, and then wham, bam, everything's fine. Unfortunately, I've been told that's not how life works. And so this is really not a linear process. You're probably gonna dive into some tools, have some great conversations, something might shift externally, and then you're going to have to reevaluate and maybe go back to your cash flow projection template, or bring in some other great resources provided by Post-Mary Community Foundation or consultants or whoever you might be working with. So this is something that's built to help you at certain points in time and kind of to be returned to. So the goal really behind these tools is to help you frame and narrow conversations and provide a little bit of boundaries on the wide world of uncertainty that we're all finding ourselves in. I will also say that they were developed in the toolkit. You'll see there are 5 or 6 sources that are from the Bridgespan Group, Scale Collaborative, Sea Change. There's some great articles that we built this toolkit from. And while the toolkit is really a kind of a how-to of applying them, I'd absolutely recommend digging into those articles and reading through them, because I think they provide a lot more richness to what we're going to be talking about. And then 2 more things. In addition to this not being a linear process, it's also not a highway, it's a guideline. So, we hope you can find some value and some use in them. And then when it stops being a value or use, move on to the next thing that will help you guys continue moving forward. And then finally, with all of these, and especially the new Normal Toolkit, Being intentional about your facilitation process or how you invite the team in to talk about future planning is quite important, as Adam's going to touch on in the next slide. You know, we're all exhausted, and we're all trying to do not just 1 to 3 things at once, but a million things at once. And it's both addressing what we really need right now and also addressing what we're not sure we might need, what our organization might look like in 2021. And that's difficult. And so to add some strategic planning on top of that can feel really daunting for your team. So just being really intentional about that invitation to start this process, I think is something to keep in mind.
So really, as we developed these 3 resources and as we thought through where organizations are today and what they need, really, if you were to distill down our current situation, it sort of feels like we're trying to run 2 parallel tracks right now as an organization. And the bandwidth we have for either of those tracks shifts over time, and it has shifted as situations change. And those 2 tracks are crisis management, act now, protect cash, protect mission, protect clients, protect staff, protect operations, and survive, with also being thoughtful and proactive with how am I going to maintain my relevance and my impact into the future, whether that's 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, 5 years, and trying to balance those 2 ways of thinking simultaneously is very, very hard. And to have the bandwidth to devote to both of them at the same time is pretty much unreasonable. So when this first kicked off and Governor Bullock instituted a shutdown order, everyone everywhere went into that crisis management mode, where it was, okay, what do I need to do today in order to protect my staff, protect my clients, protect my organization, managing cash, managing employees, managing unemployment. Like 6 weeks ago, most of us couldn't spell SBA, and now we're very well versed in PPP loans and EIDL loans, and like all that stuff makes sense to us now because we were in that crisis management stage, and that was the vehicle for managing crisis. Now it sort of feels like we're coming out of that sprint mode and coming into a little bit more of a marathon pace, which is adjusting to what we're calling a new normal, when in reality, nothing about this is normal. So that's probably a bad moniker, but we're trying to adjust and figure out how do we tweak and change and develop ourselves in a way that allows us to be relevant, allows us to grow, allows us to thrive in the future so that we can be who we need to be right now to our clients, to our community, and also be in that place in the future, whatever that future may hold and wherever that and however far out that may be. So it's these 2 tracks simultaneously. And we talk about the crisis management stage. This is where we were 8 weeks ago, and we may end up back in this spot again in the near future. You know, there's this sort of wax and wane about what we need to face. But crisis management is about managing cash, protecting what we have, protecting our assets, protecting our clients, protecting our staff. And so it's that managing cash inflow and outflow. We have a whole presentation that we developed and a template, which is the cash flow projection template, that allows you to measure not just revenue coming in the door and expenses going out the door, but actually measuring on a week-by-week basis how much money's going out and how much money's coming in. How many checks am I writing and how many deposits am I getting in the door? So it takes some of the uncertainty of timing of money in, money out of that conversation. It allows you to get very detailed and very granular. And there were some organizations who needed that, who needed to measure cash flow on a weekly basis to make sure that I'm going to be okay. And that was especially important when we were talking about PPP loans and EIDL loans and knowing like what resources do I need now to support me for the next 8 weeks. We may get back into that point in the very near future with the PPP loan period ending at the beginning of June. That 8 weeks is up. And right now we don't know if there's going to be an extension or some other relief. So we may be back in that crisis management mode and managing cash week by week in the future. So we have that template for you. I think Shelby will probably get the link out to the spreadsheet. It's on our website. And there's also, if you look at our town hall schedule, there's a whole hour-long presentation that we developed that teaches how to use that template. But it really is putting in your cash on hand today and mapping out what you expect as far as money in the door, money out the door on a week-by-week basis. You can do different scenarios, and you can also spread that out and look monthly. If you don't need to be that granular, but you need to just think about, okay, on a monthly basis, how much am I spending versus how much am I receiving? you can do that as well. So that becomes a great tool for leadership teams and for boards, just to make sure everyone feels okay with the mission viability and the fact that we're going to be okay in the next 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever that period might be. So that's a great resource for the immediate, for the crisis management. And I think before we move on, I want to ask if anyone has looked at that template. Is there any questions about how to use that, or just about the concept in general? I'd be happy to take those now. Before we dive into the other two resources, which are for the other track, which is future planning and looking out into the future as far as we're able. Okay.
All right, thanks, Adam. So that's that thing you can return back to. Hopefully it's something you can run through now and then return back to and keep updating. I've worked with that tool with a board I serve on, and I can tell you as a board member, it's so nice to see that cash flow projection. And so I'd absolutely recommend incorporating that into your internal operations or your reports or whatever that needs to be. And that link is in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and send another link now. We're going to move on to Building Your New Normal, which is the toolkit for nonprofits. And Adam is going to talk through the basic outline, but I just want to do a quick introduction. You know, if you click on the link, you can access the toolkit, and it talks a lot about what the toolkit is and is not. And it's no surprise, right? This isn't a golden goose answer or a silver bullet. I'm sure those metaphors do not work in that situation. But it's not going to provide all the answers you need, but hopefully it can help you frame some conversations with your team so that instead of going down the road of, well, I think this is going to be the case and I think this is going to be the case, and kind of drifting away from the program or the mission at hand, it can help you frame some conversations that you can have as a team so you can move forward in a way that is both thoughtful and meaningful, but also efficient, right? And that you're able to focus some of your questions and your conversations on things that are going to be of most value to you at that point in time. It does cover three main things. So we want to do a little work identifying possible scenarios, identifying your current state, and beginning to build your new normal. So by the end of it, you maybe have a little bit of a plan to make a plan to move forward. We put really either optimistic or, you know, unrealistic time limits on there, and that's by all means absolutely a suggestion. I think the goal there is that you take some time over a couple of weeks or the course of a week or a day, and you limit it so that you don't continue the conversation, you know, beyond where it becomes usable. But whatever that time frame works, or whatever that is for you in terms of a time frame and capacity and energy, I encourage you to dive as deep or move on as quickly as that works for you.
So the toolkit, just a quick overview of how it sort of marches you through different questions and different decisions to make. Like Shelby said, I think if I had to sum up the toolkit in one phrase, it's that it helps you come to some clarity and some common set of assumptions on the external world, your operating environment, and then gives you some clarity on how you should respond to the things that you can control. Because there's so much about the situation that we can't control. But we need to make some assumptions and come to some consensus around what the future may hold. But we really want to focus on is what's within our wheelhouse that we can control, and how should we respond in a way that's going to maximize our mission, maximize our viability and our sustainability in the future. So there's some questions around thinking through the external world and our operating environment and what that might look like. And then it dives into our response, how we should respond based off of two parameters. One is the need for our mission in the current time, the current space, and our current community. What's needed right now? And then second to that, what's our capacity to meet that need? Knowing that there are certain limitations that have been put on us, both funding-wise and ability to provide service. So what's the need that exists, and what's our capacity to meet it? And then from that, what's driving those two variables? What drives the need for our mission and the need for our service? We'll get into drivers a little bit more in a few slides. And then on the flip side, what drives our capacity to meet that need, whether it's funding or staffing or physical, the ability to gather physically. And then from that, we have some work on finding your role based off of these 4 definitions of how would you define your organization or your program, and then some questions that you should be asking based off of where you find yourself, the role you find yourself in. And then from that, after you've defined and identified where you are now and who you should be right now for your organization and for your mission, how can you make some pivots and take some actions to be who you want to be in the future, based again off of the need for your mission, your capacity to deliver, those drivers, and your role.
So picking up at that first step in the toolkit, I think all of us at some point have engaged in some speculation about the future. And not only is it inevitable, but it can also be really helpful. What this workbook does is tries to provide some boundaries for that speculation as a team. So one of the first exercises you would walk through with your organization is to do some speculation, right? And consider different extremes within different scenarios. And at the time we wrote this, we came up with a few that were pretty pressing. And now some of those are not as pressing, and some have changed. So feel free to change or adapt them. We also have one at the end that's, what's top of mind for you right now. But they include workplace and facility conditions, public health conditions, economic conditions, travel conditions. And the exercise here is to walk through speculating either end of those. So one extreme might be that growth and stability returns really quickly, and we immediately go to a really stable economy, and everything picks back up and there's no recession, right? Another extreme might be we're headed for a really long lasting economic impact on the other hand. And so walking through, well, if it's, a really quick rebound to growth and stability, what does that mean for our organization? And then on the other hand, if we're heading towards a pretty dire situation for our economy, what does that mean for our organization? And write it out, right? Jot it on a whiteboard. We don't use whiteboards anymore because we might not be in the office. So jot it on a Zoom board or a pencil and a paper, whatever that means for you. And try to think through what those extremes mean, and then do it for the next case, right? If cases continue to subside, or if cases start surging through the rest of 2020 and into 2021, those extreme thoughts. And the exercise here is not to say, well, I think, I read this article and I think that cases are going to continue to subside. I don't know if any of you can predict the future accurately. Please let us know. We'd love to bring you on our staff. But the point here is not to be correct about what is going to happen, but rather to explore, if these things happen, how will that impact your organization? And in planning and considering those extremes, you're preparing yourself, right, for the most likely outcome, which is somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. So it's kind of a good exercise because it allows us to go where our minds want to go, but it provides a little bit of bumpers on the way there so that we can focus on our organization and programs. So identifying possible scenarios, I think it can be a nice conversation. I would recommend having somebody there or maybe as a team agreeing you're going to keep each other accountable when you start to stray into nope, this is what's going to happen. I'm positive of it. I read a XYZ article yesterday. But really to keep the focus on the organization or the program that you're discussing and the impact on that.
So after you've done some of that work on looking at different extremes and looking at, again, those external circumstances for your organization, they do impact your organization, but frankly, you have very little control over. The next step in that is to identify needing capacity. So when we talk about need, it's talking about what ability do you have, or what need exists currently for you to provide your mission, to provide your service, to provide your programs. There are many needs or many organizations who, when we went into this pandemic situation, the need for their service skyrocketed. if you were in food service, or you were in housing, or you were in workforce development, or you were in one of those core essential services, the need to provide your service was dramatic over the past 8 weeks. There are others where maybe the need was a little less dramatic. Maybe if you were in, I don't even want to you guess at what some of those organizations might be, but there's some organizations who kind of went into a slowdown, and it was okay to be in a slowdown because the need for what they were offering, the need for their mission in that point in time had lessened. And then the other side of that is, what's your capacity to meet that need? So again, some of those essential services, maybe they stayed as business as usual with their operations, but they didn't have the capacity to meet a tenfold increase in the people who needed that service. And there are others who, as their mission slowed down, their capacity to meet that mission also slowed down because they couldn't gather in person, or they couldn't meet clients, or they couldn't do this, or they couldn't do that, based off of funding limitations or physical gathering limitations. So their capacity went down. And sometimes an inverse, where the need is dramatic, but your capacity is down, or the other way around, where the need has diminished, but now you have a whole bunch of staff who are sort of idle and need things to do. And so you have extra capacity. And there's a response that's needed in all those circumstances. But I think, and we're going to get to that, but the important part for you to really hone in on and define is what drives the need and what drives your capacity to meet that need, which I kind of gave some, or alluded to some different examples of that. But what are the 2 or 3 biggest drivers where you can say, if this happens, the need for our services is going to increase by X? Or if this happens, we're going to be able to meet that need. And that if may be funding, it may be the big grant that comes in that allows you to hire the staff to provide the service. Or it may be the governor saying, hey, you can meet in groups of 50 or more now. Or it may be something like that. But for you to really identify in, even in dollar and cents terms or in statistical terms, what drives the need for our service and what drives our capacity to meet that need, that gives you adaptability and flexibility, so that once those conditions change, once the external conditions impact your organization, you know now how to pivot and what levers to pull in your ability to be relevant and timely and flexible into the future. And we have in the scenario modeling toolkit, that's where a lot of the capacity items are related to funding or have expenses tied to them. And so that's where I think really being clear in those scenario models, what are the biggest revenue drivers we have? What are the biggest expense drivers we have? That really allows you to identify what are the capacity drivers that you have within your organization and what you should be paying attention to most poignantly. So as circumstances change, you know what are the big things that are going to drive your ability to respond. And also, there's this comment at the bottom that many of our organizations have different programs and do different things. We're a bunch of complicated organizations. Oftentimes, different programs have different drivers, where one program may be shut down, but the other one's bursting at the seams, or one may have a limited amount of funding right now, but the other one's fully funded and then some. So understand that there's nuance. It's not just a one-size-fits-all for your organization, but there's nuance within your organization, and different programs may have different drivers on these 2 parameters of need and capacity.
Absolutely. And those being able to narrow down. So in the toolkit, we walk through some questions. Some are, select the one that most meets, where you are right now, A, B, C, D, or E. And then others are identifying those most impactful drivers. And really, there's so much opportunity for some rich conversation and exploration as a team as you're talking through those drivers, either for your organization, your big O organization, or some of your programs. And I think that conversation of finding some cause and effect is something that benefits nonprofits, whether they do it right now in the middle of a pandemic, or whether they do it in 2019 pre-pandemic, or whether you do it after some more certainty exists in the world. And so that exercise can be really, really valuable. After you've walked through that, our very sophisticated algorithm that Adam has alluded to spits you out somewhere in this matrix, kind of looking at comparing capacity and need. And so for us at M&A, we often look at organizational capacity and organizational development. And all organizations, regardless of mission or size or geography, you know, the region they're serving, they have a life cycle, right? And it's not a linear life cycle, but they can be at different points in that life cycle at any point in time. And none are better than others, right? They're just different ways of being and adapting to their environment and their drivers. And for us, capacity and need are pretty huge pieces of those life cycle and what organizations are able to accomplish. So this grid is by no means a label, right? And it's by no means like where you have to be forever. But hopefully by the end of this exercise of walking through, you're gonna be put into a category of a response strategy that might help you frame some things. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but I'll go over this matrix here. So at the top end, we have our collaborators and our builders, and those are folks that are, or not folks, but organizations that are experiencing some more need. So the need for their services has increased. If you're on that builder side, you've experienced a corresponding influx of resources. So I think food banks are maybe a good example of this from what we've seen. Not all food banks maybe have seen corresponding support or fundraising, but many across the country, you know, they've seen an increased need, and they've also had increased capacity. That doesn't mean everything is going, you know, all tickety boo, but it does mean they've got some ability to ramp up their services, right? Collaborators might have experienced an increase in need, but maybe they're not in that front line of services, and so that corresponding increase of resources or staff capacity hasn't quite met it. And so those collaborators are in a position where they're being creative, right? They're trying to find new ways to meet an increased need, even though they're not operating with an increased capacity. And so they might be working with builders, they might be working with other organizations, they might be fostering partnerships or providing support or shifting their programming to deliver it in new ways, right? Hibernators, so if we go to the bottom half of this little matrix here, we have hibernators and operators, and they're folks that are experiencing, you know, maybe a decreased need or kind of no change in need. And so an operator, I would say, is somebody that's mostly continuing with business as mostly normal. They're moving forward. They don't really have more or less capacity or more or less need, but maybe a little less and a little more capacity. Their fundraising and resources haven't been impacted heavily, but their need is like, you know, it kind of is what it has been. So they're able to mostly continue operating as normal. Their biggest questions might be, you know, what's our staff look like, and can they continue working remotely, or what might that be? Whereas hibernators are organizations that Adam alluded to earlier that have experienced both a decreased need in their services, and no nonprofit is ever going to say we have a decreased need for our services, right? And I don't think you should, but there is a demand, right? And so when we were forced to work at home, the demand for in-person training fell, right? So we at M&A just experienced a decreased need or demand for our in-person training services. And that's not a bad thing. You know, it is what it is. And then they've also experienced some decreased capacity. So especially if you have event revenue generation models, right, that revenue is not coming in. So you've got these 4 places, and we're gonna go into the next slide to talk through a little bit how those scenarios can help you frame a response and frame some questions. But a question for you guys before we go on, just having a really quick look at this matrix and knowing that it's not going to pinpoint you in that place forever. Which of these 4, or maybe a combination of these 4, do you think your organization is in right now? And feel free to chat those in to the chat box. And I'll say, like always, you know, these are ways to help narrow the conversation, so you're not trying to be all things to all people. Well, feel free to think about it and chat it in if you have something, but we'll move on to some of the questions that might be helpful for certain organizations to ask. So in the workbook, after you've gone through the exercises and come out with what stage or role you might be in at this exact moment in time, which is not keeping you there forever. The workbook then provides some questions for you. So different roles are going to be focusing and thinking about different things. And these are good questions for everyone to ask, but given that we all have limited time and energy and resources and capacity, these questions can kind of help you focus your future conversations. So builders are going to be asking questions a lot more of how can we grow and deliver our services safely? How can we make sure our staff and clients are protected and healthy? Collaborators are thinking, what are the highest needs in our community right now? And where is that going to meet up with our mission area? You know, hibernators might be thinking, you know, what plans do we need to make to restart normal operations? Or what pivots do we need to make to start thinking about how we can begin reopening? And then operators are really thinking about that. How do I continue keeping people safe? Can we continue operating with this new environment, and how long? And all of the answers to these questions aren't as important as the conversations you're going to have. And then tying this into that scenario modeling toolkit, it's going to help you paint that picture of, well, how long can we continue operating like this as a builder or a hibernator? And as you go and do that work in the scenario modeling toolkit, you're going to have some answers to that. So it ties together in a really nice way. So finally, you've had some time to think about possible scenarios in the big W world, and you've had time to think about your organization and what you're doing and what's impacting you. Next, and the final piece of this toolkit is to really think about what the future looks like for those you serve and what you want the future to look like for your organization. And these two questions in various ways kind of end the toolkit. So you've had some conversations about your now, and now you get to have some conversations about what possibility and opportunity, you know, your role provides. And that can be hard to think about, but I think it's also really important for us to consider when things change, there's an opportunity there to rebuild them in a new way, and a way that might better meet your mission, or it might better serve the people that you serve, or the environment, or the communities, whatever that looks like. And in order to do that well, right, your organization also has to grow and evolve and change. And maybe that's investing in some higher tech capacity, or maybe that's investing in some management training for remote workers, or maybe that's investing in PPE because you need to keep people safe, right? Whatever that is, those two questions go hand in hand as you move forward. And then finally, the toolkit will kind of ask you to walk through what are your next steps, right? And those are by no means going to be the best only next steps, but hopefully they'll help you target, if this is where we are now and this is where we want to go, you know, what are 3 things we can start to think about or tackle as a team, or conversations we need to have to get us to where we need to go. Yeah, so that's the new normal toolkit in a nutshell. But hopefully it's something you can take back to your teams and start some conversations with, or at the very least reflect on your own and see how that might impact your own program or your organization. Any questions on that?
And Shelby, I think while people think through some questions or chat them in, we did have a couple folks who responded in the chat to the question about where people find themselves now. And Jono gave a response, which I'm going to pick on him for doing that. He said that they're in a builder stage. As youth unemployment spikes, demand for national service is spiking, and partner agencies are also needing help on conservation projects to manage increased use of public lands, which I think is a great example of fitting in how external circumstances are driving their organization's need. And in turn are driving their capacity to meet that need. They have partner agencies who are saying, hey, you have expertise, you have the ability to serve this group. We have a need for that right now, and let's partner and figure out a way to do that. That's going to maximize impact. I think the helpful thing about the toolkit is that's going to ask that team to some questions around how do we sustain this level of activity? What resources do we need to meet the need that's now spiking for us? And sort of how do we take advantage and institutionalize and systematize the the spike that we're seeing right now, so that our impact in the future might be changed forever and always, or at least for a longer period of time. So it's not this blip, but it's this longer term increase where the organization is pivoting and growing and changing and thriving and adapting in a way that's going to make some profound and foundational changes to the organization in the future.
And I want to follow that up with Jono's next response, which is that they just emerged from 2 to 3 months of the hibernator stage. And I think that's, I thank you for saying that, Jono, because I think there's that flexibility that we might need to hibernate now so we can grow later, or we're growing now and we know we might need to collaborate or hibernate or return to normal later. And having an idea of what that timeline looks for your organization is such a valuable exercise for us as we move forward. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this toolkit before we jump to the scenario modeling? Okay. So if, and this is cliche, so I'll say it anyway. If you think about the building your new normal toolkit, that's sort of taking that 30,000 foot view of your organization, which is definitely a business cliche. The next layer in, coming down a perspective, coming down to 10,000 feet, is translating those future plans and those conversations you have in that toolkit into what resources do we need to carry out the possible futures that we think exist for our organization. What are the costs that are necessary to deploy those resources? And what funding do we have to support that plan? And the key point of the scenario modeling toolkit isn't to identify what the revenues and the expenses are, but to identify the level of uncertainty that exists in different options, and to have some contingencies and some plans and some action steps that you can take to mitigate uncertainty and mitigate risk as best as possible, because that's going to create clarity and adaptability for you moving forward, and for your teams to have clarity around, if this happens, here's how we can and should respond. So capturing uncertainty in both in scale and in impact is the key hallmark of this tool. We look at revenues and we look at expenses, and uncertainty is defined differently on both the revenue side and the expense side. So when we talk about the revenue side, we have two different types of revenue on the whole in nonprofit organizations. We have revenues that are fixed. We put in the grant request and we either get the grant or we don't. We put in to get this government contract, we either get the contract or we don't. In that instance, the uncertainty we're talking about is about probabilities. We either get it or we don't. We either get 100,000 or we get nothing. And there's not a lot of variability in between there. So uncertainty is about probability. That's probably, I would say, 20 to 25% of our revenue sources are in that fixed category. Most of our revenue is in this variable category, where the uncertainty we're trying to capture is the level of variability. So are we projecting a 10% decrease in the coming year, or are we projecting a 90% decrease in the coming year? Whatever those percentages are, whatever that variability is, or the range of variability is going to change our response. If we have a very variable revenue source, we need to plan for the variability and the uncertainty that that could happen, versus some of our revenue where it's like best case scenarios, we get this, worst case scenario, it's 95% of that. I can sort of put that one in the bank and say, okay, I can count on this. So when we talk about uncertainty on the revenue side, it's about this probabilities and variabilities. And we'll look at how that plays out in the toolkit to really help you look line item by line item at your revenue sources and capture the level of uncertainty that you may be experiencing. On the expense side, it's about finding those drivers, right, that we talked about earlier. I like to use the Pareto principle in our expenses, and that is that 80% of your activity or instances are going to be captured within 20% of your items, meaning that 80% of your expenses are probably going to be found within 10 to 20% of the chart of accounts that you have in your income statement, your expenses. And we know what most of those drivers are, right? Or most of those expenses. Probably staff. Staff is typically the largest expense we have. Occupancy is up there, and then depending on your mission, there's probably 2 or 3 others. But you could probably find that 80% of your expenses are captured in 5 to 7 line items on your expense sheet. And so identifying what those are and identifying possible options to capture different levels of uncertainty on the funding side to make sure that you're going to be viable and sustainable moving forward. The other part of this that's helpful is to make sure you're capturing your full cost. And I know there's a few folks who have been here that have done some of our full cost accounting workshops and know what we're talking about. We talk about capturing full cost, but that's, if you want to run a scenario on an individual program, make sure you're calculating not just those program costs, but the cost of your accounting and the cost of your management and the cost of your fundraising, so that you know what it really costs you to run that program. And so you don't find yourself at the end of the year going, why did this program lose so much money? I thought we were going to be okay. When in reality, we weren't capturing some of those indirect or soft costs. And also making sure that we're capturing all uses of cash. So again, most of us, or some of us in the last 8 weeks, have taken out operating debt that we have never had to do before. A PPP loan is operating debt. Now, most of it's going to be forgiven, hopefully, fingers crossed. But at the time, for the present time, that's debt that we have to pay back. And that's a use of cash that doesn't show up on your income statement when you capture what's my bottom line look like. Paying principal on debt doesn't go on your income statement, but you have to spend that money. So we want to make sure that we're capturing not just our revenue and expenses, but what are those other non-expense uses of cash that we may have to spend out. And also, as you'll see on the scenario modeling workbook, it allows you to model to meet the need, not just to balance your budget. So oftentimes when we build a budget, we say, okay, we have 500,000 in revenue. Now let's get the expenses to line up with that. When in reality, that may or may not be what we actually need in order to meet the need that's being expressed right now for our organization. So it allows you to sort of decouple revenue from expense and say, okay, if we were just to say resources weren't an issue, what would we build on the expense side to meet the need that's presenting itself to us right now? And then we can go back and tweak and make some adaptations to that to balance it. But it's helpful for us to have that conversation first of what resources are needed, and then talk about, okay, how are we going to fund that? And lastly, this allows you to, again, through that driver conversation, to identify the core of our organization. So most of us have a number of different services, and some of those you could probably say are a better expression of our mission impact than others. Some are more impactful than others. What's core to our organization and our mission as it exists today? What things can we not live without, either from a system standpoint or from a mission standpoint? And how do we protect those and make sure that we're not sort of cutting into muscle as we're trimming our organization to make sure we're going to be sustainable moving forward? So as we dive into the template, I'll actually show this, but it allows you to do that work on the revenue side, do that work on the expense side, and then bring it all together to show you where different revenue scenarios meet different expense scenarios and what's the net income of those different scenarios. And from that, what drives that net income, and what are the actions that I need to take either to ensure that I get this outcome or to remedy a negative net income. And also gives you the ability to map out what are the assumptions I'm making as I'm putting these figures into this workbook. That'll make more sense once we're within it. And lastly, the important part of this entire process is that this can lead you to clarity and to action. So as you build out your revenues, build out your expenses, look at your uncertainties, look at some different expense scenarios, it should highlight for you what are some moves that we can take that are going to maximize our financial viability moving forward. So some of those are like what I call a no regret move, which is if I can save $5,000 this year by adapting this new system and it doesn't harm my mission impact and it doesn't harm my staff and it's just a net positive for me all the way around, now's the time to do it. Now's the time to take that step and find that efficiency and add that new system or add that new process. There are also sort of tweaking on the edges moves that we can take if we have to save money, like trimming benefits or going without non-essential travel. Some of those things that don't harm the mission, don't harm the core, but allow us to bring our budget back into balance. And then thirdly, there are those things that are going to hurt a little more, where we may find out that based off of present circumstances, we can't continue to do things the same way we've done them before. We can't offer the service in the way we've done it before. And we're going to have to make some cuts. And how should we do that in a way that's going to, again, protect that core, protect the things that are essential to who we are as an organization? The important part of all of those moves is identifying what are those triggers and drivers that tell you when and how you should act. So from that process, you should be able to identify that if something happens, either an event or a date, I'm going to take this action. So if we don't receive this grant, I know I have to cut my budget by 10%. If we're not allowed to do this event at this date, I know that I'm going to have to take this action on this side, or maybe the other way around. If we identify that the need for our services is still at this super high level in July, I'm going to spend 10% more on this expense item to meet that need. So it gives you these very clear triggers, which is helpful both for you as a leader and also for your team and for your board. So there's clarity. So people aren't wondering what's going to happen if, based off of future circumstances, but it becomes very clear and transparent. And there's some accountability built in, both for you as a leader and for your board, to say, here's our plan. And we don't know what the future is going to hold, but we have a plan for what we think for the vast majority of circumstances that may unfold in the next 6 months. We understand how we're going to act based off of how things might change. And I'm going to switch over and actually look at the template, and because I think that's going to answer some questions around actually how to technically use this and its value. So bear with me for a second.
And Adam, I'll just make a note as you're swapping screens, the link to access the scenario modeling toolkit is in the chat.
Great, thank you. So here's the toolkit. You have an instruction sheet on the first tab, which is pretty basic, which just says fill in the highlighted cells. At the bottom, you have 3 tabs. One's your revenue scenarios, one's your expense scenario, then the third is that summary, which I mentioned, where it all comes together. On the revenue side, you have the chance to put in all the different sources of revenue that you experience in your organization, whether it's earned revenue, like a government contract, or I have in here, just as an example, for M&A, we have member dues. We have members who pay dues to be M&A members. That's earned income. Or you may have fee for service, or you may have, like I said, a government grant. Some of you may have contributed revenue. Most of us have contributed revenue, which is individual donations or foundation grants or event revenue or sponsorships. Folks supporting our mission with tax-deductible contributed income. And then at the bottom here, even though this isn't correct from an accounting standpoint, we did add in proceeds that are non-operating revenue. So this is your chance, if you did get a PPP loan, for you to put that amount in here, or if you got some other sort of federal relief from some other bucket, you have the chance to put that in here. Even though it's not revenue per se until it's forgiven, it's still helpful for you to calculate all the resources you have to support your operations. So process-wise, I would list out all my sources of revenue that I've built into my budget. And then I would list out when I built the budget for 2020, or if I have an amended budget now, what are all those budgeted figures for each of these sources of revenue? And then you have to ask yourself some questions. Is this revenue variable or is it fixed? And I'm going to show you what this looks like without examples in there, just so you can see that. So this is what happens when you don't see anything. Is your revenue variable or fixed? And if I say, well, member dues is a variable source of revenue. We budgeted 100, but that we may not hit that. It's a variable source of revenue. As soon as I hit variable, this cell becomes highlighted, which says, okay, if this is variable, what's the absolute worst case percentage that's possible for this individual revenue line? And I may say, in this instance, 75%. Worst case scenario, if things go really bad for this year, worst case scenario, we're going to get 75% of what we budgeted. And you can see as I'm doing this, the workbook is actually mapping out 3 different scenarios based off of my inputs. So my best case is always my budgeted figure. My worst case is always what was budgeted times whatever percentage I put in here. And my moderate case is just the average of the two, the middle ground, the midpoint. So this is where you can start to build in that uncertainty, right? So I may say, you know, this could be really bad. Worst case is actually 25%. So I've got a big spread right here between 100,000 and 25,000, and the middle ground is, you know, 62. Or I may say, you know, like I've mentioned earlier, worst case scenario is 90%. So now I have less variable, less spread. I also may have some sources of revenue that are fixed. So I may say, this is a grant. I'm either going to get it or I'm not. I put in a request and they're either going to say, yes, here's the full amount, or they're going to say, no, you get nothing. So in that instance, the uncertainty I'm trying to capture is the probability or the likelihood that I'm going to receive that grant or receive that source of revenue. And I have some options here to say either it's 100%, it's a lock, I'm going to get it, in which case my best, moderate, and worst case scenario are exactly the same. I'm going to get it. I've got the award letter that says I'm going to get $250,000. Or I may say that it's 75%. It's better than a coin flip, but it's not guaranteed, in which case my best case scenario is that I get it. My middle case is that I get it. I still feel pretty good about that, but there is a chance that I'm not going to get this. So I want to have a scenario that allows me to map out what does my future look like if I don't get this grant. I have coin flip, 50-50. Best case scenario is I get it. I don't want to count on it though, as far as a moderate case, middle ground. And definitely worst case scenario is I don't get it. And lastly, it's worse than a coin flip. I'm not banking on it on this point, in which case I'm not even going to put it in as a best case option. So you have the ability to map out the percentage of variability and the percentage of probability for every single line item of your revenue that you have within your organization. And that's going to give you a compilation of 3 different scenarios: a best case, a moderate case, and a worst case. I'll tell you, when we actually walked through this process at M&A, we listed out our revenue line items just like we had it in the budget. We listed out our budget figures just like it was in the budget. And then we went through line by line and said, how do we feel about this source of revenue right now? Do we think it's 90% or 50%? Where do we feel the middle ground is, or the worst case scenario is? And we made some assumptions. And those assumptions may change in the future, in which case I can come back here and I can change those assumptions here. So I may say, geez, we really overshot on this. I got to bump this down to 75%. Or we may say, you know, things have gotten better, in which case we've sort of honed in on what's actually going to happen. And worst case scenario is going to be back at 90, whatever that might be. So this becomes a living, breathing document that you can come back to in time as circumstances change and as you get a clearer picture for what your future is going to hold. So the scenarios can sort of narrow in on reality as it unfolds. So you end up at the bottom line with a sum of 3 different scenarios. And you have the option here in the notes to just sort of give some of your assumptions and some of your to-dos that you should carry out to bring to fruition what some of these numbers are. On the other side then, and I'm actually going to put this back to 75. On the expense side then, you have the ability to do the exact same thing, where you can list out your expenses, staff salaries being the top item, occupancy, and then other. And then we have down here some of these non-operating expenses, which is like principal payments on debt. So if we have to pay back a PPP loan or an EIDL loan or some other, maybe it was an operating line of credit, we have the ability to put down the uses of cash that we're going to have to build into the budget for those non-operating expenses. You have the ability to put in what your original budget was, just like you would do for your revenue side. And then you have the ability to put in 3 different expense scenarios based off of percentage of reduction or increase on those line items. And the way that we did this at M&A is we kind of kept consistency between scenarios 1, 2, and 3. So we said, scenario 1, we're just going to think through the most draconian cuts across all of our line items, across all of our services. If we were to sort of cut down to the bone, what does that look like? How deep would we go? And how would that impact our services? So 1 is going to be our most major cuts. 2 is going to be increased need and increased capacity. So we're actually going to build some increases into some of these line items, knowing that we may have to adapt and actually devote more resources to certain expenses like salary or contracts or consultants. And then scenario 3 for us was just going to be sort of status quo. Maybe minimal cuts in some areas like travel, because we're not traveling as much, or catering because we're not doing in-person trainings. But besides that, it's kind of operating business as usual. You have the ability to define these 3 scenarios for yourself in any way that you would like. But I think the important thing is to make sure you keep consistency within each of them so that you know what those themes are and can speak to those when you identify drivers and actions that you should take. So you have the ability to project anticipated reductions. So right here, I'm saying scenario 1 is a 10% reduction in my staff salaries. Scenario 2 is a 20% reduction in my staff salaries. And scenario 3 is a 30% reduction. And you can see those numbers are being calculated over here on scenarios 1, 2, and 3. So this is just 330 times 90 or minus 10%, 330 minus 20%, so on and so forth. You have the ability here to do any percentage from 0 to 100. And then after you get to 100, it goes into negative percentages, which is an increase. So I'm anticipating I'm going to have a negative 10% reduction. So I'm actually going to increase my staff salaries by 10%. So it's 330 plus 10% back up to 363. So you have the ability to do anywhere from 0 to 100 on the expense side and anywhere from 0 to 50 on the increase side. And I would walk through this the exact same way I did revenue, which is just like we did here at M&A. We listed all of our expense items, we listed the budget, and then we talked through scenario by scenario what we're projecting as far as a reduction or an increase. All of that comes together on this tab where you have your 3 revenue scenarios right here based off of the variables that you put in, your 3 expense scenarios right here based off of the variables you put in, and then what's the net income where those scenarios meet. So you end up with basically 9 different scenarios. Best, moderate, and worst for number 1, best, moderate, and worst for number 2, best, moderate, and worst for number 3. You end up with 9 net incomes. You have the chance over here to put in your assumptions off of those scenarios. And then down here, you have the option to start to talk about what are the actions that we're going to take based off of what this information is telling us, where these revenues and expenses come together. What's driving those numbers? What are the actions we're going to take, and when are we going to take that action? And this becomes a great summary document to share with your staff, to share with your board, to actually think through and map out your thinking and the assumptions and the actions that you're planning on taking and when moving into the future. So you have the ability to change any of these line items here, any of these line items here. I would encourage you, nothing here is locked down. So I mean, you can change any cell. As you'll notice, these cells here are formulas. So if you click delete off of this, that formula goes away. Don't do that. So I would encourage you to save, you can find this on our website, but I would encourage you to save a clean copy of this document to your hard drive before you start changing things, just in case you happen to delete a formula that you can't get back. You can start over. And this is a process that we would be happy to work with you on changing this if you need it changed at all, and also just to provide some consultation and facilitation to walk through this document just as we would for the other toolkits. And I'm going to hop back to my PowerPoint.
Wonderful. Thanks, Adam. As you're navigating back there, I'll just say walking through this, you know, watching Adam develop this and then being able to walk through it as a team was awesome. And the answers that we came up with ended up being really helpful as we are looking at our revised budget for the rest of 2020. And now we know why and what and how, right? And of course we can't predict the future, but that exercise and having some bumpers on those guesses was huge. So as Adam mentioned, I guess I should ask, are there any questions on that, on the scenario modeling toolkit worksheet? Feel free to chat them in, and as you're chatting those in, I'll just make a note on process. And so, you know, determining the right tool or conversation for your team, for your time, and for your takeaway is just always that ever-present question, which is, I believe these tools are magic and they will be incredibly helpful for your organization, but they'll only be helpful for your organization if you find the right time and space to utilize them with your team. And so just setting some intent there before digging in will be really helpful for you in the process. And then, as Adam mentioned, we are happy to walk you through any of these toolkits or talk through them with you. And of course, if you have feedback or thoughts or ideas, or just want to talk a little bit about the concepts here, we'd love to have those conversations. So please feel free to reach out. And Jono, I see you asked that question. I'll go ahead and share the page that you can find these on and download them through, and they're on our resource page for COVID under tools for nonprofits, and they're also on our town hall website, which I will share as well. So you can certainly share them, access them, utilize them, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Before we wrap up, any questions from anyone else on today's presentation? Wonderful. Well, thanks all. Thanks for joining us. It's fun to see the Bozeman community represented in force, and look at some of your faces and see some friendly names out there. And for the rest of you that we haven't met yet, I hope to meet at some point, not over a computer screen, but we'll see when that happens. So thanks so much. Please reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you the next time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both so much. I'm sure that part of the reason no one had questions is because it's overwhelming how amazing those resources are. So I'm sure everyone's just waiting to dive into them. So I mentioned this in the chat. We are recording the session, so I will be posting that on our Nonprofit Cafe website, our Nonprofit Cafe page on our website. I'll have the recording of this and also include a link to the page on your guys' website with all those resources. So you will all have access to this afterwards. Thank you so much, everybody. I guess if there are no further questions, we can wrap up and everyone can go enjoy their long weekend.
Yeah, hope you guys have some good plans to rest and relax, or
get outside a little bit.
And not look at spreadsheets. I know you're all going to want to just dive into these over the weekend, give it some time.
Give yourselves a break. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.